That's new. That's not what you normally drink.
Four Hands Fest beer.
There you
It's
go.
the season is taking a turn, and so we're emptying the stock.
I finally went out and bought a whole box of the Urban Chestnut one.
Oh,
Oak
that's
Cats, right?
Ocats is something you need to have a case of before they stop making it for the season.
It's a new
That's a
tradition. It's a new
classic.
tradition for me. Matt, I kind of made an executive decision. I want to do what you said, but let's talk
Is
about.
that an executive decision when you do what I say?
Well, I'm gonna specify a certain way of doing it. Believe it or not, there are some slight OCD things to me. I like a certain timeline to flow in a certain way, and let's do this one. Let's talk more about the lineup. Let's start in the back. Let's start with the defense, and we'll work our way up because I think we both have a lot we can elaborate on as far as individual players that we maybe didn't fit into the KTRS version.
Yeah, this is why I like you hosting as opposed to me because my OCD brain, I just want to get as much in as possible, and sometimes it's just a brain dump and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, I think the biggest ways that our lineups differed, in a lot of ways, we all agreed on some form of two strikers or a different look up top. And even in Santi's, when he's using Salio, we've seen Salio as a second striker this season. He's played up at the top, trying to stretch the field and get wide in a way that honestly Sam Adeniran does too. Obviously, they have different makes and different skill sets, but Salio could be a second striker. He doesn't just have to be a left or right winger. But one thing that we did differ in, especially Santi and me, was our left back, looking at and how our fullbacks can match up together. And I had the stat of Akil Watts very specifically because when we talked about all the different players who have received criticism this week, Jake Nerwinski, it might be enemy number one as far as who the fan base is looking for a different player to slot in. There was a very strong opinion that Daniel Shallowy just absolutely torched Jake Nerwinski in a lot of ways. And the passing network for SKC kind of backs that up in the sense that Shallowy was so far wide and high on the left from everybody else that he clearly was stretching the field in a way that nobody else was, and nobody else was on the entire field, City included. And I didn't necessarily think it was extremely fair to give Jake all the blame on that because, for instance, the throw-in goal last week where it was on the side of the field and Jake Nerwinski was marking Shallowy, who was kind of in the middle of the box, and then Ndembe ended up scoring the goal behind Jake, right? Well, Jake was just doing what he had to do to guard Shallowy, to mark Shallowy as that last attacker back. I think you look to other players like an Indiana Vasilev who maybe should have been, protecting that far wing side to notice the left back moving up. It's that scenario that I think Jake was caught into where he had responsibilities and roles, but you do have to admit that Shallowy did outrun him quite a few times, getting in behind. It was just a pacier player. So I
Well,
think that's,
just to
yeah.
add to that, yeah, if you don't mind, Berkey also mentioned the fact in that presser, the fact that a lot of shots weren't blocked. And yes, we didn't clear the ball far enough, right? In a couple of in more than a couple circumstances. And some of that is just the midfield following their runners. That's the kind of thing you kind of drop off on if you're tired, if you want more evidence toward that. And so
Yep.
that's what a overlapping fullback is meant to do, is create an outmatch. It makes the fullback make a decision one way or another. And City has always been very forward and not hiding the fact that we put our defenders on an island at times. And so Nerwinski is on an island. That you can expect problems to develop and for those guys to have to catch the blame on a lot of that. And I've been critical of Nerwinski in the early parts of the season. I thought he made a lot of silly mistakes, and I think he's cleaned a lot of those up, in my opinion, but maybe I'm missing some things.
No, you're not, and there's a reason why he's earned a starting spot back after Akil picked it up for a good stretch of games. And when asked at a press conference before the Vancouver game, Nerwinski had said, yeah, he was tapped because of his defensive abilities. And what I think he means in that regard is the thing that we've noticed this entire season is when you have one of your fullbacks, we refer to him as attacking minded, and one defensive minded, it plays out in that asymmetrical shift where if you have Marcanic, Nilsson, Parker, and Nerwinski, then when you're pushing the ball up the field more times than not, it's Marcanic making that run. We've seen him work well with Edu Leuven and with like a Jared Stroud off on the left side or a Sam on the left side pushing high. And so you're getting numbers high because you're pushing your left fullback up there, where Nerwinski drops back into a right center back role. And so when we're pushing the ball up and attacking, you look back at where our defenders are, and it looks like we have a 3 center back look going, and Marcanic turns into a wing back. When we are resetting defensively, yeah, Marcanic will drop back. And the same thing happens vice versa when Hebert is in at left back and Akil Watts is in at right back. We tend to shift more towards the right, and Akil will be the one to push up. I was actually surprised when I look back at the stats that I dropped on the KTRS portion, where Akil Watts actually has more tackles and interceptions than Jake Nerwinski. That was surprising to me, even because I just remember, and the eye test tells me that Akil is higher up and he's not as defensive minded, but that just speaks to his two-way ability, his ability to track back. And like he said earlier in the year, when I asked him, how does he know where he needs to position himself, being that, because that, just think about how difficult that is from a mindset perspective on your responsibilities to push high on the right side, to be part of the offense in carrying the ball up. Sometimes it takes you to the end line on the attacking side, but your responsibility is also on maybe a left winger or a left midfielder to make sure that they can't get in behind you. How do you know where to be if you're trying to push the ball up to make sure that you're not losing anybody? And his answer was simply looking over his shoulder, just glancing back. And he's proven to be very adept at doing that. And so I trust that if he's in on the right side, he's capable of tracking back. And I don't have that worry. We've seen it play out a few times. That's one reason I think that it would provide a different shape, because he wouldn't be that player that drops back in that 3 center back when we're on attack. He would be pushing high. And I immediately default to the success that we've had with Hebert on that other side. Kyle Hebert's another player who's gotten a lot of discussion throughout the year, where he did a great job at the beginning of the year as a center back, starting center back before Nilsson came, and then moving to a left back role when you had the depth that Josh Yarrow and Lucas Bartlett provided, and you were having issues with Johnny Nelson. He was able to cover that left back role, more defensive minded, and he learned how to play it throughout the year. But truthfully, we've had a really good record with Hebert in at left back. Where we have not had a good record is Hebert in at right back. Nashville comes to mind. There's another game that he came in and he moved over, but he hasn't shown that ability in limited fashion, admittedly, to play that. But Hebert at left back, we've had success with. And so I hear and I see those bad performances that he's had in those moments, but more often than not, he's out of position even as a left back. So he's playing the wrong side. I wouldn't put him at right back in any circumstance right now, but I still feel comfortable with Hebert at left back. That keeps a lot of the principles that the team has been successful in this entire season, leveraging a winger who can push high and 3 defensive minded on the back line.
And I said earlier when I said my lineup, I'm not too choosy about who plays what fullback it starts and which one ends the game. I will say that I was a bit frustrated that Hebert came in late in that game when we needed to make up goals, because every time he got the ball in the final third or close to it, it was pretty frustrating at that point. I'm still surprised he's allowed to push forward when he's in there as a fullback, as high as he does. But it's fine. So I don't know. I'm thinking about, here's a good question actually, and I think it relates to this topic perfectly. Daniel Gavura says, do you think if Casey gets up and goes defensive, I think we'll need Celio Nico in the final third to create. That's Chris Gebhardt said that actually. And do they even need to be up a goal before they go defensive? Are they gonna try being defensive and just force us to score in this game? And what does that say about our fullbacks? You know what I mean?
That's another thing I go to. We can't worry about what they're gonna do. Like, we've seen multiple versions of SKC, and we get out of ourselves when we're waiting to see what they're gonna do. Wouldn't surprise me if their intent is to sit back a little bit more, go back into not necessarily a full low block, but at the same time, I could easily see Peter Vermees going into the bag of tricks and surprising STL, because if St. Louis goes down a goal early, everything changes. Like that, I think the risk to worrying about what Sporting is going to do is that you focus on playing off of them. You allow them to dictate the flow, get an early goal, and then you have to do essentially what you did in matches like LAFC, like Seattle earlier in the year, where Bradley Carnell loved to say earlier in the year he never played for ties. If they go down, he's going all out to get a goal back, to get a second goal, to take the lead. That's what City will do. They'll get outside of themselves. They'll try to do too much, and that's where the goals could pile on. So huge risk if we allow an early goal. And I think that might be what Peter Vermees does. He looks for those moments and opportunities. What his team showed in this game last week is an ability to score almost out of nowhere. Those 3 goals in the first half they had last week, they had a combined .33 XG. Like you made the call that it was frustrating to not block shots. Well, that's the only reason that they scored. They didn't have any good angles. All 3 were outside the box. All 3 were space that had closed onto them, but they had an open window to shoot the ball, low percentage or not, and they made us pay. They've proven their pinpoint accuracy no matter where they are on the field. Your job as a City defender now is to put your body in the way of them in the goal. And I think it's going to come in moments. I wouldn't be surprised if they drop back into a low block like Daniel's saying and tried to counterattack and really, really create moments and not high volume opportunities. But they showed last week that they can be successful in doing that. And so the onus, like I said earlier, is still on our back line, on Jabulu Blom, to close up those space and block physically block their looks to the goal.
Yeah, and I think the chances they got, while XG didn't like lay out how good the chances were, and I don't know if they were like well worked or not perfectly. I mean, it doesn't matter. I think there's a storyline here that no one has said yet, and that is, one, perhaps City had like just one of the worst defensive performances they've ever had, which I do think is true in this case. With the set piece goals, was like, what was that? I mean, just wild. That wasn't like them. And then the other side to that is, KC is, from my friends who are KC fans, finishing has been a problem all season. So, like, did they have an especially good random game of finishing? Is it part of their hot streak that they're figuring out how to finish? There's a chance that they just had a really good game against St. Louis, and that their finishing was good one night, and St. Louis could get back on their horse and really prove that it was a really weird game, and the true winner is St. Louis. There's a chance of that. I just want to throw it out there for once.
Definitely is, and that's one thing that's difficult to quantify and difficult to analyze, because it's the intangibles of form, and that's why
which is my specialty here.
but it's real, because coming into the playoffs, I think you're seeing that play out. You're seeing what happens when a St. Louis City side is not in the greatest of form, and a Sporting KC side who have basically been fighting for their playoff lives for the back half of the entire season have scored goals when they've needed to, they've won when they've needed to, and they've fought and clawed their way in. They've been facing these do or die scenarios just about every single week since League's Cup. And most notably, their past two games before St. Louis, it was lose or go home, or win or go home. Mm-hmm. And that dates back to the St. Louis loss 4-1, where after that they dumped 3 on Real Salt Lake, they dumped 3 on Minnesota, and then San Jose held them to a draw, which they won in PKs, and then they dumped 4 on St. Louis. So 3 out of the past 4 games, they've scored at least 3 goals. That's a team that is finding ways to pour on these goals, and a markedly different team than they were earlier in the year. That's where go back to the strikers, right? Strikers on City Nico Gioacchini and Klaus have consistently said that form matters for them. If they're scoring goals, they're going to consistently keep scoring goals. Well, that's what Sporting KC has shown an ability to do. Alan Pulido, since coming back from his injury at the beginning of the season, has taken this team to a new level. And it's almost unfortunate that St. Louis has to deal with them right now because of how hot they've been. This is the reason. This is the exact reason that I and many others wanted to play San Jose. Do I think that we're outmatched on every turn? Absolutely not. We spent the entire first half of the pod saying what we need to do to win. And I firmly believe that we have the ability to beat SKC like we've done twice in the regular season. But it would have been an easier path, I think, to victory with San Jose.
Completely agree. I wouldn't have been nearly as worried, and I think they would have performed better in the first game, just by nature of the type of team. Completely agree. Let's move forward a little bit here. Let's talk about Leuven and Blom. We all pretty much agreed that needs to be the double pivot there.
Yeah.
And just the one thing I wanted to say is that you look at how St. Louis sets up with the three in the back when attacking, looking like three center backs. Blom is also like the backup plan if they catch you on the counter against that attacking left wing if it's Marcanic, right wing if it's Watts. And so, Blom is a massive piece in that. Matt, you were talking about wanting to play through the middle a little bit more. What are your thoughts on their importance here?
Well, Blom's importance defensively is almost taken for granted at this point. Like we're obviously a different team when he's in the lineup, and we're a different team.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to mute myself. You keep going.
It sounded like a fire alarm.
It was. I better check it out.
Blom's impact to this team almost goes taken for granted because we're a different team with Blom in the lineup versus not. The way that he impacts the game, both defensively and those 1v1s against a number 10 from the other team, like a Gadi Kinda or an Eric Tommy, is so vitally important. And the way that he can cover spaces for the defense when we drop back into that three center back type look, when we're pushing the ball up, that's how we can prevent ourselves from getting caught in the counter, is by having Blom drop back and help out. What Blom does as far as progressing the ball up, though, is more act as a traditional pivot. He doesn't progress the ball up himself. He's middling in our team in his progressive carries, but he's one of the higher players in the team in number of progressive passes. And I think especially earlier in the season, maybe just right after League's Cup, we saw a very successful Jabulu Blom when he progresses the ball up with his passes. He makes some long passes, and it's being able to read the field on where our players are for those. Because there's a comment in chat that Craig was saying that it seemed like our passes were kind of just off a little bit, and we're kind of harder to connect. Our touch has been off as a whole team. And that starts with a Tim Parker, Joachim Nilsson, and Jabulu Blom when they're progressing the ball up. Through the outside, through our wings, there is a little bit more space. And so I believe there's a little bit more opportunity for error. When you're receiving the ball, you have a little more space to work with. But when you're in the midfield, if you're going to progress the ball through the midfield, you're going to have to deal with a clogged space. And so quick, tight touches, those long progressive passes are dangerous in and of themselves. So you're having to deal with needing to be really high caliber individual players who can progress the ball up and find open spaces and move the ball. And that's where Edu Leuven comes in. The conversation this week has really centered around where is Leuven's best position. That's one of the big topics of conversation. And there's a lot of calls for Leuven as a 10. I don't know if that's coming from EAFC or not, because to be quite honest, the new game, Edu Leuven, he kills MLS opposition as a 10. So if you're looking for an A lineup for City and EAFC, Leuven at the 10 is it. But here in the real world, I would argue that Leuven, like I said earlier, better at the 8, better at progressing the ball up, either passing or carrying the ball, and then giving service to some of those outside wings, to AZ Jackson, moving the ball from the defensive third where Blom lives to the attacking third. And the amount of service that Leuven gives into the attacking third, into the area around the penalty box, is where his biggest asset to us can be, besides set pieces. If he can deliver the ball to AZ Jackson or deliver the ball straight through to a Klaus or a Sam, then he's done his job. I would love Leuven to get shots off after shots because he's a bullseye. He's deadly aim accurate, but he's so good with the ball at his feet to delivering service to others. And that's where the stat of Edu before AZ having 8 points, 5 goals, 3 assists. And then since AZ has really taken a starting job with the San Jose Earthquake game, 1 goal, 7 assists. So he's been providing a whole lot more service, a whole lot more opportunities to others, but we've still remained consistent on the number of goals scored, 16 goals versus 14. He is not the problem in our ability to score goals when he plays the 8.
It's really interesting to me. Sorry, it's really interesting to me that I noticed Leuven in several of the games ahead of this playoff game was really going wide a lot and just looking for that cross in. And maybe that's I haven't found a correlation with that. I don't know if that's part of Sam being in it.
The diamond. He plays the left mid in the diamond is one of the things.
No, it was before that even. Maybe they
that.
were in the diamond and I just didn't realize it actually. But I don't know. Basically, I think if we see Nico out there, he probably won't be going wide very often. But I do have a feeling that if Sam and Klaus are in there, that I think he's going to go wide a lot and look for a cross in. And if KC is compact and defending well and letting St. Louis own the ball, like I do think he's going to go. I think that's going to be our best option is to go wide in possession and lump it in with those two big guys in there. And I just hope that we're not going to be talking about this a lot because I think if this is what St. Louis has to rely on, it's going to be a pretty rough game personally. I don't know.
Well, and I would love that idea, and I think it can mix well with a lot of what I've been saying about moving the ball through the midfield if that's what we need to do. Because if you're having Blom as the pivot, find Leuven as the outlet, Leuven has options if we start pushing high on both wings. Part of the beauty of Leuven centrally is his ability to see the field and find the open man on both sides. You're not pigeonholing him to just the left side, as successful or not as he is with Marcanic in that overlapping run. I think having Leuven be more of that field general who can see the entirety and deliver the ball to an AZ Jackson or an Indiana Vassilev, Jared Stroud, or even higher up on the field to Sam if he makes a wide left run, or over the top to Klaus. Like if you're able to create space for Leuven to work, then wherever he delivers the ball, it can generate some of those crosses. Klaus thrives on crosses. His ability to find space in seemingly nothing is tremendous. The amount of crosses that we generated against SKC last week was not great. Most of them were by Jared Stroud and most of them were blocked. Edu Leuven only generated 3 crosses. Celio Pompeu generated 3 crosses in his few minutes of work, 11 minutes last week. That's one of the things that he can do as a sub is continue on that work that maybe an AZ or a Stroud or a Vassilev does. So I personally would love to see Celio be one of our first subs off the bench because I know how he can impact the game for a prolonged period of time. But doing a lot of those same things is generating the crosses. We are successful if we can deliver the ball in, and our strikers are good at finding space more often than not. And worst case scenario, if we don't, or if we're not successful with those crosses, then the odds of them clearing the ball out significantly is relatively low to the point where we're now generating some of those 50-50s in the attacking half, keeping the ball in play with numbers high. The problem is when they're able to get the ball out and we lose some of those aerial duels, then we're in trouble. Then we're on the counterattack and they're on the fast break. But we have to be a little more clinical in winning some of those 50-50s high, generating crosses. The combination of successful attempts after the crosses and keeping the ball in play in that attacking third, that's going to lead to a lot of goals.
Let's talk about our wingers. I kind of said, I'd like to see Stroud in there because I think of his pressing ability. I think he's our best. I don't know, between AZ and Indy, like is AZ tired? Is he going to have a tough game after this last one? It is getting late in the season. He is young. Maybe Indy's going to be more informed, but he's had that injury recently.
AZ only played 58 minutes last week. Indy played 79. Stroud played the full 90. So of any player, I would look to Stroud. This is one of the few times he's actually played the full 90. Most of the time, he's one of the first or second subs out. He goes so hard. Like Jared Stroud is a polarizing figure in the St. Louis City fan base because he's got such a hard work rate. He's that blue collar player that you think you would love as a St. Louisan, but at the same time, he's not the most crisp with his passing. He doesn't generate the highest percentage shots. He's not the flashiest of players, but he gets the job done where it needs to be done in the pressing, like you said. He connects the ball up an awful lot. I think I said he led the team with crosses in 6 last week. So whatever he does, wherever he is on the field, he's at least putting the ball or attempting to put the ball where it needs to be.
One of those crosses was incredible, and with his left foot, it was almost a goal.
Yeah. Jared Stroud. I've been called a Jared Stroud apologist a few times this season because I'm a fan of his style of play, and I think it's led to a lot of the successes that we've had. And there is a reason, believe it or not, that Carnell keeps going back to him in the starting 11. He's consistent.
Agreed.
And he works in this system. This is the system that he was built for and that he thrives in. Knowing that he went full 90 last week, though, is the only thing that gives me pause. Otherwise, I would be entirely fine with Indy or Stroud or AZ, two of the three in those wide mid roles. And I think that provides a pretty fun buffer for subbing. We know that Carnell loves to sub as attackers. And so obviously I think that both of our wide mids are going to be candidates for subbing in the second half. Celio Pompeu, Tomas Ostrak, Indy Vasilev, Jared Stroud, those four can kind of man that area if they need to. And then you have Nico, Sam, and Klaus. I'm comfortable with any single one of them in the roles that they need to be. But the one thing I don't want to see, and I've seen calls for this too throughout the week, is I don't want to see Nico wide. Nico Gioacchini does not play well as a wide midfielder.
Well, and we haven't asked him to do it this year, hardly at all. So why start now? That'd be silly.
That's the other thing is you don't want to get too fancy. You don't want to go beyond things that you're not used to and you haven't had success with.
It would be very, very cute. And we all know how I feel about that. Yes.
And Nico played with Orlando City as a wide midfielder, and he didn't like it. He's been very honest this year about how they didn't use him correctly in his strengths. And I think that would be a huge miss to play him out wide.
No.
Underneath is probably where he plays best. Underneath Klaus, that's where he had a lot of success. Not necessarily as a 10, but playing off of Klaus, holding the line. So that could be a different look to what Sam provides in the first half, and whether you want to say first or second. But I look to Celio Pompeu, honestly, as a potential X factor in the second half if he's brought in early enough.
What do you think about him, the shot from Santi about him starting?
I wouldn't mind it. I would champion that lineup. You know, I love to find reasons to cheer our starting 11, no matter what it ends up being. That's just what I do.
It's a good way to put it. I like it. No, I didn't mean that negative. I'm sorry. That came out wrong. No, I like it. I agree with you. Yes.
It is. Oh, well, I appreciate that.
Sorry.
But I do think that, no, it was nicer than what a lot of people say to me sometimes. But I would like it because of what we saw in that 11 minutes. The fact that he had the second most crosses in the game after just 11 minutes in the game. He was beating players 1v1. I don't look for him to go the full 90. Why would you?
No.
But in the same sense that you like what Stroud offers, you like what Celio offers with his quickness and his ability to control the ball. I think there was a stat, and I don't have it in front of me, but he leads the league in one of those categories about carries. I think distance carried with the ball or something like that per game. But he's very, very strong with the ball at his feet. And so as a winger, he can provide a little bit of progressive carries that we don't normally see out of our wingers. We don't normally see the ball being moved from, let's say, midfield or the third of the attacking half down to the end line on the far wings. We don't see that often. And in fact, St. Louis doesn't control a lot of possession down those areas. But that's something Celio can provide, especially down the left side where most of the season, St. Louis hasn't done well in maintaining the ball in those wing areas. Celio could do it. And whether you talk about starting the game, whether you talk about a second half sub, I'd be a fan either way of what he could bring and the different look that it would provide, especially what we ran last week.
For some reason, Celio's, the things that you said are good about Celio. For some reason, they don't translate terribly well when he's started in the past. But everything else you said, I agree with you. I think he will definitely come in as a sub. And I want to see both wingers subbed out early. You know, I said I don't want to wait too long for the subs in this one. I want both wingers out early. It's what's happened most of the season, and I think it benefits the way we play, how much we ask those guys to run. It needs to be intense the entire game, even if someone subs out at the half.
Isn't it funny how we haven't even mentioned PKs as a factor in how much the dynamics change in how we're approaching this game. Last week we talked
can't.
about,
I mean, it's a loss, right? I
exactly.
mean, unless thank you. Yeah,
You're totally right. I just find it funny that we're talking about subbing early, subbing often, and the thought of PKs really should not enter the equation. That's my point. Is that
agree.
At this point in time, your back's against the wall. You need to win in regulation. You don't leave this to chance. You don't put Carnell's comment that he made Thursday of Tim Melia has to lose a shootout at some point. When he was on Morning Footy, he said that. And you don't want to put that to the test at all.
I don't like that he said that.
Well, you don't want to leave it to that kind of chance. Like,
No.
I would not want to face, I don't want to face Tim Melia in general, let alone at Children's Mercy. And so the idea being, you do what you need to, playing within yourself, subbing when you need to, based off your own tactics.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be chasing the opposition. If we're watching the game on Sunday and it gets to the second half, 60, 65 minutes, and we're saying, oh, St. Louis needs to sub to better handle SKC, ... That's already a recipe for disaster. We need to be talking about the game. The game's a stalemate, or St. Louis we're up 2 goals and it looks like we're lagging in this area. So we need to change things up. We need to bring on a Salio or an Ostrak or a Vasilev, and we need to reinforce this spot. Like, staying within what St. Louis is doing, talking about us versus them, is going to lead to a lot more success.
Oh my